Hello, everybody. My name's Louis Yakumi, now from LConnect, having another conversation with a leading automotive logistics specialist in this industry, an automotive or a logistics procurement specialist. And I'm very happy to have a good friend of mine, Gereon Hempel, as joining us in this discussion. So welcome, Gereon.
Thank you, Louis. I think when did we meet? Maybe 10 years ago in Mexico, I assume, something like that, during one of the conferences. And so we have been in touch all the time, and I really appreciate that you have me here today. It's an exciting time. It's always an exciting time in supply chain and logistics. And yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. The good thing about logistics and automotive logistics, I've been doing this for about 25 years now. I never thought I'd been doing it for 25 years, but the good thing is it's always changing. There's always something that keeps it at the top of the agenda. And there's plenty happening at the moment that makes automotive supply chains and logistics very important. But you're right, we've known each other for probably 10 years when I must have been about 21. But if you can tell us
Exactly.
a bit about, where you were then and what you're up to now.
Yeah, that's a good segue. 21. I founded 21 Consulting around 2 years ago, and before that, I think I built some knowledge within the procurement space, specifically related to logistics. So I was at VW for a decade, spent some time in Mexico at the start of my career, and then in the United States, with responsible for all sorts of logistics, honestly. So what you can think of: port operations, rail transportation of finished vehicles, car hauling, plant logistics, material logistics, across the board, aftermarket. And yeah, I spent there a decade, and now I started my own company, 21 Consulting, which is a problem that I saw during the time that I was at VW was a lot of suppliers, they have a great product and they have a great sales team, but they never really get to show it because they don't understand how procurement actually works and takes the decision. So it's sometimes wrong place, wrong time, and a waste of resources. So with the knowledge that I have, I want to add that third ingredient, which is procurement knowledge, so that they can get a competitive advantage. That's a little bit about me. I'm from Germany originally. Maybe you can hear that from my accent. I know you know it, but the viewer may not. And yeah, spent some time in Mexico, which was fantastic. Start of my career, as I said, so about 5 years, and then evenly split the rest in the United States. And I'm currently living still in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I have my office.
Mhm. Okay, and you started in procurement, so you never started in logistics and moved into logistics procurement. You started in procurement, which was that kind of a choice, a career choice, or did you fall into it? Why did you start in procurement?
Let me tell you the story. So I was on an exchange semester in Mexico during my international studies. I studied in the Netherlands. Sounds spectacular, but that was around 2 hours from where I grew up. And I did an exchange semester. And on one of our beach trips, it was just really a boys' trip. We drove past the the Puebla plant of VW. And I said, "Oh wow, that sounds interesting." And my Spanish at that time was solid after 4 or 5 months. But I said, "Hey, I really love it here, and it's a German company. Maybe apply for an internship."
Mhm.
And then, yeah, what internship do you apply for? I had no idea, to be very honest with you. Quality, supply chain, I don't know, finance. So I applied for a couple, and then by mistake, I got into procurement or purchasing, which we can later talk about what the difference is,
Mhm.
at least from my perspective. And yeah, started there as an intern. And that was back in 2013. Had a great time there. And then initially I planned 6 months, 6 months in Mexico. Well, then I started my internship. Then I got hired on. Then I met my wife. So, you know, the rest is history, I guess.
So was it your personality that made you a procurement person? I remember, I've always had this thing that procurement guys are the bad guys, they're the mean guys. I even remember my son, who worked in logistics procurement for a while,
Yeah.
for 4 or 5 years, saying to me in his first couple of weeks, Dad, I'm not sure if I'm made out for procurement. I'm not sure I'm mean enough to be in procurement. So either the procurement industry changed, or he changed and became mean, which wouldn't surprise me if he became mean. It's obviously from my wife's side of the family. But is it? Do you think the procurement guys have to be the bad guys and the mean guys?
No, I don't think so. I never really liked the connotation of having to be the mean guy because it means, first of all, that people don't like to talk to you, and you need people to talk to you because you might be the subject matter expert on negotiations, on certain contract terms, on how to attract suppliers or whatever, but you also need that people to come to you, right? So you have an internal client that is logistics or whoever is buying something, and you want them to talk to you. If they avoid you, they will just try to go around you and do some maverick spend, and you will never get to work your magic, so to say, and be strategic about what you're buying, right? So I never liked that. On the other hand, also, like if suppliers always feel that they're getting ripped off in negotiations, they don't understand why you're doing the things that you're doing, well, then the next time you're going out, they will not be interested to talk to you anymore, right? Because the market has changed. Maybe 10 years ago that was okay. Actually, I thought it was never okay to be that way. But right now, there are suppliers out there who can actually choose who to work with. So the procurement rule is also a little bit of a sales role, internally and externally, right? You have to attract people to want to work with you. And I don't think being mean helps with that at all. Maybe inquisitive is
Mhm.
a better word, right? You ask a lot of questions. The supplier knows more than you do because they're providing the service. And then usually your internal stakeholder, they also know more than you do about the service that they require. And you need to learn all of that and bring it together.
I remember it was probably just around the time of COVID, or maybe just before, when we were looking at the EVs were coming into play. And I remember one procurement guy, and I think it was a tier supplier, saying to me, we have to teach these new electric EV suppliers how to supply the automotive industry. And I said
Yeah.
to him, but they don't need the automotive industry, where but often a small part of it, they supply Apple and Samsung and everyone else with their parts and chips especially. Perhaps we have to learn how to purchase from them.
Yeah, 100%, right? As I said, it's a little bit of a sales role even
Yeah.
sometimes, right? You have to attract. I actually also think that more and more procurement people need to go to logistics and supply chain conferences to start the conversation. It's not, the suppliers don't have to come to you. No, you have to attract suppliers to want to work with your company and making sure that that process is working well. That's the way that you really create value and for your company and also for these suppliers. It's very different now. I think so. Yeah. What is that your perspective as well, or what have you observed?
I think so. I remember during COVID, and that was a special case because of the chip crisis, the ocean container issues and challenges we had, capacity issues we had over the years. And I remember at least one person, a senior VP at a major car maker, and some other logistics directors saying to me, that they want to become the preferred supplier, or buyer, so that when an ocean container person, or chip person, but even in logistics, that they want to work with your car maker because they
Yeah,
can choose. They can pick at one stage. They can pick and choose. So you have to be the preferred company that they want to work with. So you need to build a better relationship with them. And
well,
I hope that's changed the way that it works now. I'm not sure now that capacity is getting back to normal. I don't think, and I hope that the car makers aren't trying to get their revenge and thinking, right, now we can get back to the old ways. I
it
think
would be a
they've learned their
disaster.
lessons and realized that it has to be more of a partnership approach now.
Yeah. And I think that's So important what you're saying, because in the end, even if you have the upper hand, right, you will still be strict with people that don't want to work with you, right? When you're in procurement, I'm not saying that, okay, now we're just letting everybody do whatever they want to do, because we want steady service and we want um, suppliers to tell us when things are going wrong. So during COVID, for example, if contracts were breached because somebody was just moving over to the gold rush land, I don't know, whatever. Well, you remember that a couple years later down the road. And not
Yes.
because you want to be mean or whatever, but you're asking yourself, do I actually want to work with these people again?
Mm. And you need reliable partners and they need reliable customers. So the flow
Exactly.
of information has to be much better,
Yeah.
more efficient and faster, so that, to get the best out of the providers, you probably need to make sure you're giving them the right information to enable them to provide you with the best services.
Yeah, 100%. And I think if you think about margins, for example, it's potentially better for your business to have constant margins of 10 to 20%
Mm.
than compared to one year you have 3% and then the next year you have 30%. How can you predict anything? So being a good partner actually does pay off.
Yeah. So, what are the biggest challenges in logistics, in purchasing, particularly I'm looking at logistics purchasing, logistics procurement, but what are the biggest challenges for purchasing professionals at the moment?
Well, I think that one of my colleagues mentioned it a couple of years ago, and I thought it was a very, very well-fitting example. He said, okay, we were riding an outsourcing wave for a very long time, where after 2 or 3 years, you would just find a new supplier who would be cheaper than the one that you had for the last 3 years. And I don't know how that worked in the past, honestly. And I saw a statistic the other day that for the first time since 2019, the margins of automotive suppliers have actually surpassed the ones of OEMs, right? I think it was including everything, right? Also materials. So I think it was 7 versus 6%. And I thought that was very interesting. And one of the challenges is exactly that, right? You have a little bit less power and leverage. When you're in procurement, you have a lot of power, but some people are very mistaken in taking that for their own power,
Mm.
because that power is just on loan. I can tell you that. It's because you have a specific position and a specific budget responsibility or spend responsibility. And that's why people are treating you a certain way.
Mm.
And so if you're actually not a reliable person, you are doing the things you say you are going to do most of the time, and then sometimes you apologize when you don't. You're transparent when you can, and you tell them when you can't be transparent. Those are some of the real challenges, because before that, you were more in a let's negotiate this thing and let's get this done, and then I'm done with it. Now, there is a 3 to 5 year relationship where you have to also be a little bit of a protector of the supplier when you're in procurement, right? Because the supplier is not participating in a board meeting, right? Very simple example. I don't know. The assembly shop has a production problem, right? Production stops for a minute.
Mm.
There is a logistics department, and there is the head of the assembly shop. They sit in the board meeting and they have to reply to either the plant manager or to the CEO. What happened? Well, guess who is the person that's not there to defend them? The supplier themselves, right? So you need to be kind of a referee in procurement, right? You need to, okay, is this actually justified? Are they really the culprit here? Or is it maybe somebody else? Is it us? That's
Yeah.
also very important, right? How can we help the supplier to be actually successful? And that is not a completely new challenge, but I think it's getting more and more important because we rely so much on the supply chain, and there's so much cost pressure that yeah, even the smallest mistakes can cause a delay in production, and then you have hundreds of other people and equipment idle that still need to be paid but aren't productive. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And what about for again, in this instance, logistics service providers? Because I suppose what they want to know is, how do you choose a logistics service provider? How do you do it? What do they need to do to become suppliers to you? What advice would you give them? And what are the most common mistakes that they make when they're trying to win business with the car makers or part suppliers?
Yeah. Yeah, I think two things are very important on becoming a supplier. Maybe three. The first one would be patience, right? Because the bid cycles, as I just alluded to, maybe are 3 to 5 years. Now
Mm,
they're getting shorter with transportation. I have seen 1 year or 2 year because the market is going up and
yeah,
down so much that
yeah,
nobody can actually commit to these rates. So patience is definitely a virtue. Then because it's like the exponential curve, right? It starts slow, and then if you're really performing, you can get a lot of business and you can make good money. The second one that I was thinking about is asking your client, once you have established some connection, about, some people call it a business plan, some call it a yearly forecast on when are you going to go out for bid, so
mm,
that I know that maybe 1 or 2 months before that, I will contact that specific buyer or procurement professional again and ask them, hey, can we please be on that bid list?
mm,
The third one is actually be on the bid list, right? So there's not, with larger companies, it doesn't work like, hey, give me a couple of lanes or give me some piece of business and let me prove myself. Not really. You need to gain a little bit of business step by step. And the first step is actually to be invited to provide a quote.
mm,
And I know it's mind baffling, but there are companies that have tried for years and years to even be on a bid list.
yeah,
And so you have to find a little bit of a line between, yes, I want to be present, top of mind when that bid goes on. So the budget, the business plan helps you with that, so that you're not following up every single week. And then the second part of it is, once you are on that bid list, ensuring that, okay, I remember now, or here I have the data, May 2025, they were going out for that aftermarket transportation bid. Maybe I should contact them now that it's the start of March, right?
mm.
So I think these are very important first
And
steps.
the sales process, two things that spring to mind for me is, one is uh, selling what you can do, not overselling, not saying, yeah, we can do everything and we can do this and that, but
Yeah.
making sure that the operations team are very aligned with the sales team. Because I've heard of
Mhm.
examples where the sales team have been great, but then they couldn't fulfill it from the operations side, and that doesn't help the sales side, doesn't help the operations side.
Yeah.
And also the kind of information they provide. A couple of people said to me, I want to approach a car maker and this is what I want to tell them. If they've sent me through a slide deck of like 100 slides, and I'm thinking,
Doesn't
no,
work.
it's too much. You can't, so procurement people and everybody in the automotive industry at the moment is so busy. If you send them, 100 slides, and I really mean, 50 to 100 slides, they're not even gonna, they're going to give
Yeah.
up very quickly before they've even worked out which is the actual useful bit of information.
And I think these two things are also very valuable. I always enjoyed it a lot when, I don't know, maybe I'm buying an operations team, right? I'm
Yeah,
buying um, warehouse services. I loved it when the sales team was in the meeting and the actual operations team, and both of them were vibing together. That was perfect.
yeah,
But because you might think that procurement doesn't need to understand what is going to happen exactly, but they do need to understand it and they want to understand it and they're going to visit your warehouse too. And so that I think is very, very important. And then, I mean, with the most of the clients that I work with, the initial presentation deck should not be more than 10 pages. Let's just say in general, I think. And then I also tell them nobody usually cares about your company history, right?
yeah,
It's, I mean, they care about what you have maybe done, like, so throw some big names out there, right? If you want to land a big OEM and you have worked with another one, throw them out. Okay, that's fine, but not on more than one slide. And then the text, right? We learned that, I think, in high school, but I think it's still very important. The 7-7 rule, right? Not more than seven bullet points with more than 7 words. And then put something on there that's also that people remember. So it shouldn't take you more than two minutes to go through that slide deck on your own and read it
Yeah.
and understand it. Because that's the initial, especially in logistics. You right, then you have it on your slide deck. Doesn't make any sense because then you're not going to have any conversation and you want to be invited to present yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about, back to the kind of procurement role, how do you balance or ensure you balance cost savings with service quality? Because, sometimes the complaint I hear from LSPs is that the tender process is so strict, you can't be innovative and things like that. You can't, maybe sell innovations or new ideas because the tender process is so strict. So the
Yeah.
two questions, unfortunately, probably two questions in one is how do you make sure the tender process allows people to offer you solutions, and also how do you make sure that as a procurement person that you're balancing, you're not just going for the cheapest one, although it's very easy to not easy, but it's possibly sounds like a good idea, but making sure you've got the service quality as well.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that a bid process is not the right time to present an innovation. And specifically in logistics, the scope of works are sometimes 60 pages, right? So at least the client, at least they think they know what they want. At least they think they know what they want. But right now, when you're going through a bid process, it's not the time to blow up your costs because you're presenting some innovation. Right now, it's about can they do the service or can they not do the service from a technical side? So offer what is being asked in the service description. Then you will be able to offer a competitive price. Once you get the business, talk to the end user and show them what additional perks or benefits you, maybe an AI solution or a control tower or whatever has. And then that can be added on at some later point in time, or maybe even during a new bid process. But then you will already have the advantage of being a supplier or a partner that has worked in that environment for a long time. I still think that it can be a massive advantage to be the incumbent because you know exactly what's going on. And so in short, a bid process, unless your client is specifically asking for innovation, is not really the time to present it.
So how do you do that though? If you are an innovative company or something that thinks, we're not going to be the saving is in the not the long run, but is by being different. That's where the cost saving is. So whereas if I try and win this bid, I'm not going to be able to really give them the cost saving that they want because it means something else has got to be added to it in some way.
Well, that is a different scenario, okay? If your innovation, of course, saves costs and then you can be more competitive through that. So let's assume maybe the upfront cost for the OEM is a little bit higher, but then over time through, I don't know, maybe delay tracking in transportation and delay optimizations, you're going to optimize and you can tangibly show that business case, then I would 100% show it. Right? So you can always also be a little bit flexible and ask your client, hey, can I quote a scenario? The scenario one is exactly what you want. Scenario two is here we have this idea. It might look a little bit more expensive, like tell them that in both letters in that email that you're sending. But over time, here is, assuming that these are the volumes, how you're going to save money with it. And we're willing to even put that into the contract that if it doesn't happen, you can switch back to scenario one or you will get compensated or whatever. So you do have to show a little bit of flexibility there. You can present scenarios and then also yeah, show confidence in what you're presenting.
Yeah, that's very good. Who should you build the better relationship with? If you had to choose, and I know you're going to say both, but if you had to choose the head of supply chain or the head of logistics or the head of direct or indirect procurement, you're trying to win the business at a car maker. Who should you have the best
Yeah.
relationship with?
Is it possible to, is there a third option?
So you sound like you're trying to win the tender now.
I don't know.
What's
Yeah,
scenario
exactly.
three?
Exactly. Hey, I have an innovative solution for you. No,
Yeah.
I honestly think that more and more, let's assume they're really strategic with their procurement, right?
Mm,
Um, I would say that it's actually your procurement contact, not the head of procurement. The head
mm,
of procurement, they do care about a great service and whatever, but they're probably going to forward your email anyway to the respective buyer.
yeah.
So have a good relationship with the buyer, because the buyer is a little bit also, it should always be in the buyer's interest to have e- enough suppliers on the bidders list so that he or she can get competitive bids. I do have an incentive. Then also are a little bit of your advocate. And then if for some reason commercially, technically, they're not fitting our needs, we can always let them know and give them the feedback for the next time, but let's not discard them
Yeah.
for the. So I think if I had to choose, I would go not with the head of procurement, not with the head of supply chain. I would say get with the procurement representative.
Yeah. Of your
Yeah.
product or service or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I have to, what I have to, I mean, I've seen it in different ways also, because
Mhm.
you forced me into an answer. So I, I also have to say it depends a little bit, because
Mhm.
some organizations really operate differently, where there is a head of supply chain and then there is a purchasing department. And
Yeah.
the purchasing department, I think if you draw a circle, this is procurement and the purchasing department is somehow this small, right? What purchasing is the execution function, right? They're the negotiators, and then they order, they issue a purchase order.
Mm.
And if it's then the case, that means that somebody else is doing everything else of that procurement bubble, and then that's usually the head of supply chain. So in that case, I would go with the head of supply chain or the logistics expert who is in the day-to-day operation, in the day-to-day planning um, of that specific bid
Mhm.
service. Mhm.
Yeah, and that's the kind of individual. But what about the role? You know, we talk about AI now, and everybody I speak to who sells AI tells me that AI is going to be the answer to everything. But
Yeah.
what role do you see technology, perhaps AI, changing how the procurement role?
Mhm. Well, I think it's simple tasks too, because ChatGPT, I tested it the other day, can make Excel files for you, right? So, and then if you somehow automate it with, I don't know, the Department of Transportation data, you can get some other data from other sources. It enriches your data that you have. Let's say you have 5 suppliers, you want to compare what they're offering. But then you have all of these other data points, what has been offered last week in California by somebody else. So that is actually very great for better decision making too. Um, I I don't know. I like AI, but I'm also a little bit old-fashioned. I think Excel is an excellent tool, right? Honestly, um, to uh, to do some sorts of comparisons, assuming that all of the offers are comparable. But yeah, AI, of course, is great. I still need to see where it replaces anybody. Um, I don't know. It might happen. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah,
I use,
it's
I
so
use
reliant on the
ChatGPT every day.
information.
So
Yeah, it's so reliant on the information you put
Mhm.
in, and even perhaps more importantly is how you handle the information that comes out. It can't do the
Yeah,
whole thing itself. You've got to understand, like I said, make sure. I think the old expression about computers used to be garbage in, garbage out. But
right.
you've got to make sure you know what information needs to go in, and just as importantly, if not more importantly, is how to handle the information that comes out. So you're right. The good thing about AI, as we know it at the moment, is that the human role, human element, is still a vital part of the whole process.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
with computers in general, the I think the problem is not as much the output anymore, it's the input, right?
Yeah.
It's our typing. Let's say we type a message, it bores computers. They're
Mhm.
idle
Yeah.
during that time.
Mhm.
So the input side is actually right now the problem. And I think we can get better at that. I don't really see, unless that there is an AI that is giving the input, which, well, would have to be autonomously thinking,
Yeah.
body, or I don't know, whatever. Um, that element still needs to be given, and you're totally right. Garbage in, garbage out. That's also an our old procurement saying.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other
Yeah.
question that people talk about, at least in the rest of the world, I'm not sure about in the US at the moment, but sustainability, has that still got a place in procurement, or is it kind of put to the side now? Is it something that we talk about? Perhaps is it something that's just passed on? I've been traveling
Yeah.
around the world recently, and the question was, how important is sustainability? And that's very important for the future, but surely it's important for now. But in procurement, you know, uh, there's such a cost element, uh, unavoidably, because of the cost of investment in EVs and batteries and so on. How
Yeah.
does sustainability fit into a procurement strategy?
I think it's to be very honest with you, and I think many people might disagree with me, but as humans, we need to survive the short term so that we can get to the long term. And sustainability for many people is sadly maybe still a long-term goal, right? But then if there are other factors, that are profitability, short-term profitability, is this business actually surviving, specifically in the automotive industry right now? Maybe it gets shoved a little bit to the side. I don't think many people want to admit that, but I think it's true and it's also natural. It's just an instinct of being able to survive the short term. Um,
Yeah,
I know that there are a lot of programs down the supply chain too. Um, and I don't think any of them are getting canceled, even though with a lot of administration changes in Europe,
yeah,
in America. You had a new president in Mexico last year, here in the United States this year, in Germany this year, there's going to be a new chancellor. And I think even in the UK, there was a change in
yeah.
administration as
Last year.
well.
Mhm.
And those long-term goals, they get either a little bit more prioritized or not. But I think sustainability as such, specifically when you're driving trucks and you're producing electric vehicles, it's also then becoming a little bit more of a short-term problem, because what's the look of a green factory, right? I mean, just think about it. A green
Yeah.
factory that is being served by all these diesel trucks coming in.
Mhm.
Well, indirectly,
Mhm.
you are doing something for the environment by then polishing your image there. I think
Yeah.
so. It might not
Mm.
be the purest of intentions, but I think it definitely helps, right? And if you have an EV supply chain, then it should be a clean supply chain, because
Yeah.
EV's image is clean.
Yeah, exactly.
Or cleaner.
How are you gonna sell EV cars if you can't
Yeah,
follow up by making the whole supply chain? Even if it's for marketing reasons, there's still a
yeah,
reason for making
yeah.
sure your supply chain is green enough.
Yeah. Let me ask you, in the UK, is that still Europe? Can I say that?
Yeah, it isn't really, but yeah,
Well, in the UK and Europe, what have you observed regarding sustainability? Is it the hunch I have is that maybe China is getting better and better at sustainability. Maybe I might be wrong. How do you compare that here? Like on our side of the Atlantic, US, Europe, and then Asia, China?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think Asia are doing very well on the mechanics and the vehicles and so on. The
Yeah.
problem is that there are a lot of their electricity is still from the old coal plants and so on. So that's their downside, but they're being criticized for that. So they're
Yeah.
trying to change, but you know, from a technology point of view, they're working very hard to be greener.
Mm.
The UK and Europe, there is the desire. It's still something that the people, the customers want to see. But I see it being passed down a little bit. You know, I've been speaking to a few car makers recently and asking them what they're doing from a logistics point of view for their supply chains or to make their logistics supply chains greener. You know, and
Mm.
the obvious first answer tends to be we're making EVs. I said, yeah, but what about you in your position in supply chain and logistics? What are you doing? And he seems to be passing it on. They say, well, what we're doing, we're using more rail, which is fine. But they were kind of already using rail before. Okay, so
Mm.
it's not some sort of super innovation or whatever it is. Uh, they're asking, are they using more EV trucks? Not really, but they're asking their suppliers, their providers to use, you know, EV trucks. And it's still, that hasn't taken off because of the cost of EV trucks and so on. So the
Yeah.
desire is there, but it's slow. It's a slow process. And perhaps at this moment in time, it's a high prior, perhaps you kind of said the head of supply chain, head of procurement, and then the local people. I think the heads, the board members, and so on will say sustainability is important. But as you go further down, perhaps further down the chain, it's harder to have that reality because they're
Yeah.
then relying on other people to do what they want to do. So the desire is there. It's still talked about. It's still a plan, but I think it's still, you know, in the future. And unfortunately, it's, you know, there's a reality behind that as well. You know, the automotive industry is in a tough situation investment wise at the moment. So I
Yeah.
suppose it's only fair and real that sustainability, the desire for sustainability is still there. The push for EVs is still there, which means that, you know, they have to um, have that, you know, mindset out there. But I'm not sure in reality it's really working
Yeah.
or
I wish
being put
we
the top priority.
hmm I wish sometimes that we would define sustainability a little bit more.
Yeah,
When, like, for example, I don't know, profitability is very clear, right? It's a
mm,
calculation. It's what comes in minus what goes out.
mm,
That's profitability. What is sustainability? I don't really know.
yeah,
I don't think anybody really knows. And that is a huge problem because it makes it I think you're right at the board level because it's such a great idea. You're saying, okay, well, let's do sustainability. And
yeah,
then the people who have to execute it, they're like, okay, what does that even mean?
yeah,
Can anybody answer that question?
mm,
Maybe there is not one truth there, right? As with the example of profitability.
mm,
But how do we define it for ourselves in our organization? What actions can you take so that our company is more sustainable today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year? That would make it easier to do potentially,
yeah.
right? I know
Measuring the
that.
carbon outputs is still, you know, very hard and
Yeah.
there seem to be a standard. I know ECG, the Vehicle Logistics Association in Europe, are working hard to do that. But you're right, it's hard to measure, and things that are hard to measure are hard to fix sometimes. So yeah, no, that's fair point. But what
Yeah.
about what other industry trends should buyers and suppliers be preparing for? What do you see changing? You know, I mean, we've covered a bit of it, sustainability and technology, but
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
are the trends that do you think they should be looking at?
Well, I think that somehow the environment in regards of trade, globalization, maybe the globe is more now a regionalization more and more. That is one thing, but I don't know if it's a long-term trend. So um, I think not being reactive is very, very difficult sometimes.
Mhm.
Because you see, I don't know, maybe 25% tariffs on goods imported from Mexico and Canada, and then you might panic because we talked about the margins of 6 to 7%. You might have a big problem all of a sudden because not only you're shipping out of Mexico, but also you have some tier one, tier N supplier facility within Mexico or in Canada. And so I think that this my point of view is that tariffs are not good for competition at all because it's just it's just a way of saying, hey, you don't have to get better. You can still be less cost competitive. Like a procurement guy hates this, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to be competitive on price and you don't have to be competitive on quality anymore.
Mhm.
And I think I would think a lot about this, but as somebody who is a supplier or a procurement person, but I would not take unilateral action at all. I would see how this is panning out, having some conversations on with your strategic suppliers, and it might be the time right now where you're seeing. Right, we have this, I don't remember what it's called, but it's basically a graph with four cubicles, right? And on the axis, you have strategic and urgent, right?
Yeah.
Or
Mhm.
say important and urgent. And
Yeah.
everything that is in the far right corner is urgent because you need it right now. And
Yeah.
it's important because otherwise you can't produce cars.
Mhm.
And all of these suppliers that fall into that category, look at them, start conversations with them on how you can maybe not do anything and still be profitable, but what are the different scenarios? Can we maybe give you a longer term contract at reasonable costs because you can spread all of your, you have security for the next, let's say, 20 years?
Yeah.
And can we shift at least some of the production into the United States so that then in turn lowers our logistics cost and play a little bit around with these business cases. And in fact, a lot of suppliers, I think, should be very proactive about this and go to their OEMs because we talked about this a couple of minutes ago. They
Mhm.
know their business way better than their client,
Mhm.
way better. And so many of the solutions that they might have, the client might not even think about.
Yeah. No, good point. And I
What,
was
what,
speaking
what
to
do
again a
you?
carmaker recently, and I asked him what was he
Yeah,
kind of most proud of. What did he think that he did the last few years? During all the crises that had happened. And you said there about being careful with so much changing and so much happening. Like tariffs on and off and so on. And you said not to be kind of overreactive. His
yeah,
thing was, I didn't panic. He said, we handled everything. We tried to handle everything logically and so on. And there were times, prices went up and capacity fell down and whatever it was. But he goes, I didn't panic. I always tried to find the right solution at that time without trying to do something drastic or different or too different. I tried to do what was right for us at that moment in time. It wasn't a kind of a panic buy or a panic decision. And I think that refers to
exactly.
with all the changes that are happening at the moment, almost daily, with the tariffs. Maybe
Yeah.
that's something we should all bear in mind as well.
And if you, I think maybe that's an advice to me, let's say 10 years ago when I started my career. When you are in procurement at the beginning, you already have a lot of responsibility, and a gut feeling is important. I've seen it many times where actually somebody, whatever, in their 20s sees a major red flag danger to continuous business operations and elevates that into the boardroom and presents that to the CEO. And I think the easy question for you is that you should ask yourself, like, if I bring this, if I don't bring this to the boardroom or to the CEO, could something really bad happen? And this exact sentence you can also say, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it's a problem. I think the boardroom needs to hear these things from
Mm.
procurement
Yeah.
or from the team of the supply chain organization, logistics organization, and the procurement organization, maybe finance even together, right? But don't waste the time. It's better to go in there and raise that red flag. Maybe it's nothing. That's okay. But if you have good reasons to think that you might not be able to produce or sell cars tomorrow, well, get on the phone.
That's important and should be kicked up. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Because
definitely.
you can and then have a proposal, right? Like don't come in there and say, here's the problem, but have a proposal for a solution. The
Mm.
solution can also be like, let's invite the supplier and have an important talk with them, but I need, I don't know, somebody to back me up with that. Let's have this conversation. Here is why I think we have to have them urgently, and then invite questions and debate it. And
Mhm.
then you are bringing something forward that can be very important to the organization.
Yeah. And almost going back to the beginning of our conversation about being in
Yeah.
procurement, you posted today on LinkedIn, I know why Doge is hated so much. I work in procurement. So can you kind of elaborate on that? And I'm sure this isn't necessarily a political comment. I think it's about
Not
maybe
really.
government efficiencies and, so I was wondering if you could kind of elaborate on that point.
Yeah, it's not really a political post, it, but the I think the main task of the Department of Government Efficiency here in the United States, there is a new department that's called the Department of Government Efficiency. They want to eradicate excess spend. I think that's the
Mhm.
mission statement. And
Yeah.
when I think about that, what you're doing is not just cutting any sort of cost. You're just asking a lot of questions. And when you're in procurement, you're asking a lot of questions. Going back to earlier in our conversations, you're not the subject matter expert on what your business unit or your stakeholder is doing. You're not the subject matter expert on the product or service that is being sold by your supplier. And when you're the Department of Government Efficiency, you're not an expert in any of what the other departments are doing. You're just asking a couple of questions. And that's not always very welcomed, right? But in any company, and I also assume in the government, any dollar that is not spent that you save goes directly into your profit margin, right? So that's why it's so important. When you talk about revenue, you usually
Mm.
have to pay for that revenue.
Yeah.
You have to pay maybe 20 cents for the dollar or whatever. In a great case, I would always invest those 20 cents. But that is where that is coming from. When you're in procurement, there is certain resistance usually already. It's a PR problem, I think, because there are great procurement people out there who actually accelerate instead of slowing down.
Mhm.
There are so that's where that post is coming from.
Yeah.
I think you can think of the DOGE or Department of Government Efficiency what you will, but there is probably some good and some bad that is coming out of it, and
Mhm.
a lot of questions, as I said. So
Yeah.
in procurement, you have to ask tons of questions.
Mm.
That's where that is coming from. I don't know. Let me ask you: can you identify with that from the conversations that you have had with other people in procurement?
Yeah, I think so because, and it's not necessarily just procurement people. It is in this, in this instance because we're talking about procurement and we're talking about those, but people just don't like to be questioned. They almost
Yeah,
want to get on with things. The question that was, and I'm really, wary of getting into kind of a political discussion. But when someone
yeah,
says to you, what did you do last week? You suddenly come into a defensive mode. Maybe it's
yeah.
how
Of
the
course.
question's asked or whatever it is, how did you save us money last week? What did you do? What did you sell last week? You
Yeah,
suddenly get into defensive mode. So maybe that's the issue. But I can understand, that I was interested in your viewpoint about, why you think it being in procurement helps you understand that. And it makes absolute sense how you described it as well. So
Yeah,
that's,
well, yeah.
yeah,
Why are we
uh,
spending that money? Why are we doing these things?
yeah,
Um, and and the question why is probably also not the best one, right? Because you can
yeah,
go in there with a sledgehammer and that's get back to
yes,
being
mm,
mean again. But
yeah,
then there are certain ways, psychological ways on how you can get people to collaborate with you.
yeah,
It's the same thing with suppliers who complain about being invited to a bid or why are we not being selected, right? You can
yeah,
phrase that better. You can say, hey,
yes,
I don't want to sound soft or anything because you can still get to the goal and that's you
mm,
want to get to that goal. But how is what we're doing right now, how is that spent helping us in achieving our goal of producing and selling our cars?
mm,
Those are the two things that we want to do in essence
yeah,
at any car company, right?
yes.
Or those helping us. Maybe I'm not understanding. Most likely I'm not understanding. Can you please help me understand?
Yeah.
Does that sound a little bit better? Would you give me an answer?
No, you're right. It used to be the
Yeah.
question I often asked when I used to speak to logistics people or procurement people, what can I do to help you? And the answer very often was buy one of our cars.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
then and getting back to what you're doing, if some hopefully, I'm sure people have found this very interesting and your answers have been very honest and very helpful if you're either in procurement or looking to work with a car maker. What do you do? Why should someone, what do you do that can help the industry yourself in what you're doing now at 21? What can you do for them?
Um, so I always like to, that's aside from 21 Consulting, but I do like
Mm,
to help people who are maybe starting out. I'm not saying that I have great advice, but I do have a little bit of experience and I think it's because I'm not that experienced, also fresher experience regarding when you start your career. So
yeah.
always interested in some conversations, right? If somebody is interested in procurement, I think what I like about procurement, and maybe that's more of the sales pitch and not the how, is that you're really involved in everything and you have a lot of responsibility from the beginning. I've seen people come into the roles and they're having $50 million of spend responsibility within the first year.
Mm,
And that can be a lot of pressure, but you learn, a diamond that's hardened with pressure is maybe not too much pressure, but that
mm,
can really help. And then you are exposed to, okay, what is the reasoning of finance for certain decision that they're
yeah.
taking? How can I influence them without actually having any authority over them? What about logistics? What about supply chain? How can I influence people? Because in the end, that's also sales, right? How can I influence people without having any authority? In fact, sometimes they don't even want to work with me. How can I get that done?
Mm,
And it's a lot of trial by fire, but once you learn that, I think it's a very, very valuable skill because nothing will scare you anymore. When
mm,
all of a sudden you, I don't know, forgot to issue a purchase order, and right now the production line is standing still, and you are somehow figuring it out. Like
yes.
I have made mistakes that um, I don't know if if I'm proud of them, no, but I don't want to miss them either, because then I was able to make it right somehow. And you get that in procurement at a
Yeah.
larger company or in the supply chain.
Mm,
What sometimes I think needs to get better, what I don't like as much, it's the same old phrase that I always told my suppliers, and I think it was also, well, not very motivating. It's no news is good news, right? That goes for your suppliers, for the head
mm,
of supply chain, their organization, for procurement and their organization. If there is no topic that they're bringing up into the board meeting, then everybody is assuming that we can make and sell cars.
mhm.
So there's maybe not a lot of praise from anybody outside of our organization that you're going to get.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It used to be the old line we say if the CEO calls the head of logistics in for a meeting, you don't think, oh, this is great. I wonder what he's going to say to me. You normally think, oh no, what's happened?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
What should I know that I don't? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Or what do I know that the CEO's found out and I wish he hadn't, perhaps.
Yeah, even
Um,
worse, maybe.
yeah. Well, thank you very much for
But
your
all
time
kidding aside,
today,
of course.
everyone.
Yeah.
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 Thank you.
Sorry.
Um, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Very interesting, very informative, very insightful. If people want to know more about what you do, they should follow you on LinkedIn, where you always
Yeah.
share some very interesting information. And we're posting your contact details on the slide at the end of this. And I'm sure that
Yeah.
you're always happy to interact with people. So thank you very much for your time, Gereon. A
Thank
lesson
you,
that
Louis.
I've learned is next time to only interview old people, because I've suddenly realized that I look like your great grandfather or something
Oh,
uh, in
I don't say
in
that.
this interview. But as you said, we've known each other for quite a while, and I'm very proud and pleased to see your development and what you're doing now, and how you're still in the industry and advising and helping people. So congratulations on that, and I'm sure we'll stay in contact for the next 10 years as well.
Oh, for sure. I think I'll see you in 2 weeks in Bonn. And yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you
Yeah.
for considering me. Honestly,
Mm.
it's always nice to chat with people who know a lot more than I do. So thank you for that.
Definitely not. But I think procurement, logistics procurement in particular, is something that I'll be covering a little bit more.
Oh,
'Cause I think it's such an interesting and important topic. So thank you for being part of this and maybe kicking it off. Got some important interviews coming up with heads of logistics procurement at car makers as well.
oh,
So
cool.
we'll share that with everybody soon as well. But thank you very much
Yeah.
for the conversation today, Gary.
Thank you, Louis.